for. And so when I say I'm part of the problem, that's what I mean. I am representative of many, many thousands of people who want to come here. I recognized that, and I knew when I came here in 2018 that I was at the early stages of that problem. So selfishly, the opportunity to get in on the ground floor, hopefully less selfishly, I recognized that it was an opportunity to be a part of the solution. A lot of other communities have gone through the kinds of growing pains that we're going through right now, and they've done it very badly. And I think we can learn a lot from those examples, especially what not to do. Fortunately, I think the politics of housing have changed remarkably in the last 5 years. And so we're going through this at a time when other communities at sort of the same stage in their growth trajectory, the politics really didn't allow for some of the solutions that I think are on the table now. So that's really what brought me here. I don't know if I answered all the questions, but there's my introduction.
Yeah, I'll take that.
My name is Chris Patterson. I am the Community Solutions Advisor for Washington Trust Bank. It's a brand new position that started as of September 1st. The reason, I think we all care. I think that's the reason I'm there. And I had a conversation about this. Why does he care? He gave me a straight answer. He does care. I think all of us up here care because of what we have to lose and everything we have to gain. And what I mean by that is I am a product of the foster care system that aged out at age 19. I know that what we have to take care of, and what we have to be responsible for providing housing, mental health services, drug addiction treatment, accountability standards, social rule of law, all of those affect the community. But the thing that I appreciate most with Gonzaga's approach is compassionate capitalism, is you cannot have philanthropy without capitalism. A city thrives on an economic engine which promotes growth, which promotes the next talent, which is you as students. You are the next C-suite students that we want to see in the market, that we want to hire to replace us. We want to find the smaller talent, come in to take our jobs. That's the focus, that's succession planning. But you can't do that when you're building 1,500 homes a year in a market where you get 30,000. So you need to have policy, you need to have good effective leadership, you need to have a good effective accountability. All of that comes with, if you can, set aside the politics and egos and move forward with getting the work done. It is going to be hard. It is going to be something that is going to be some struggles, and the public has to step up. You as the students, the adults in the room, the professionals that are here, the folks that are watching. It's going to take all of you to work with us. So my role is specifically to bring the public-private partnership together. The businesses, everybody knows we have to put a lot of skin in the game. When you sign the front of the check, beside the back of the check, you know what you have to do to make something work, which means whether you're a realtor, you're an attorney, you're a financier, you're a banker, everybody's part of that machine. So in order to make it successful, you have to have successful pieces of legislation, and business owners, for-profits, nonprofits, activists, advocates, people who care at the table who are willing to work with each other. It will not work unless you're willing to work with each other and separate the other issues. You have to pragmatically think about what you're going to do. As examples, I'd love to, not have to raise your hand, but for those who've been to Skid Row, who spent more than a week, I spent a lot of time at Skid Row in Los Angeles because of my former job. You have 70,000 plus unsheltered people living in a situation that should not have happened. Spokane is at the precipice now to where we can get ahead of that by having people come together, by working with each other, putting everything aside. We have more in common than we don't. We don't all agree where we want to live, but that's okay. We can find fundamental ways to survive. The only way you're going to do that is by bringing people together, and that's by bringing the public-private partnership. Whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you actually can move the dial forward to make sure the standards are increased. So that's what our objective is for my role as Community Solutions Advisor. And our job is to tackle helping hold the electeds accountable by showing metrics and standards, by working with people who want to help to come to the table and work to get things done. That's the biggest objective. We can't do it without everybody's help.
Thanks so much to all the panelists, and thank you, Chris. I think that he is really shining light on something that we all talked about earlier as well, and recognizing that this is a community solution. That's the only way we're going to go forward, is if the community comes together and works towards things. Often when we're facing these situations, or even for our students who maybe are coming through and just here for part of the year, and they notice it seems like there's more people experiencing homelessness, wonder what the city's doing about it, or somebody else should be doing about it, and really recognizing that we all need to be doing something about this, right? And finding ways that we can come together. Juan, you had mentioned earlier that you could maybe share a little bit about some of the demographics of folks who are experiencing homelessness, and also some of the any failures or gaps in the systems that lead folks to experiencing homelessness. And just as a note, we will have a question and answer period at the end, so we will be taking some questions. And for the panelists, I just want to invite you, if you want to chime in and you don't have a microphone, I'll run one over to you, but let's make this a conversation and not just a Q&A from us right now. So Juan.
All right, there we go. So we serve different populations. Different populations look different. Homelessness looks different for them. Our youth tend to hide. You don't see them as much. They come and go. They ebb and flow in and out of houses, and so we see them for chunks of time, and we oftentimes are respite. Our young adults are, we're seeing more of them. We're probably in the range at any given night. We're probably counting anywhere from 300 to 400 in that 18 to 24 range. And we know there's about 300 to 400 homeless women on the street, and our men are in the over 1,000 now. We don't have enough shelter capacity to really meet the need. We certainly don't have enough housing. We are seeing really with our adult homeless population, what we describe as trimorbid, meaning they have a chronic untreated health condition, they have severe mental health, and 60% of them actually that self-report, we believe it to be more in the 80s, also co-occurring substance use disorder. And the substance use is really pivoted in the last few years, and we're seeing the chemical addiction of fentanyl, heroin, and meth as our main addiction. And we do not have the services to really address the needs of that sort of addiction, chemical addiction in Spokane. When our folks identify they want treatment, our team can spend weeks searching for treatment that will treat them. And when they get in, they're authorized typically 2 weeks. They are not, if they have that trimorbidity, they're not able to live independently, and they're certainly not going to graduate out of a sustainable program and then be able to live independently on their own and then graduate even to an employment, which is really what we would want as a compassionate community. So those are some things that we're really seeing trending, and it's going to take a full different model approach, and our community saying that we believe in and we demand our MCOs and our government to pay for recovery for folks. We also know that, and we see this, if a young person or a woman has come to us and experienced homelessness and they're in our shelters or in our housing, every single system, including parenthood, that was ever designed to help people through life has failed them. The judicial system, the child welfare system, parenting, their home life, everything has fallen underneath. So this isn't just a, here I gave you shelter bed and here's housing and you're going to be okay now. It's a complete rebuild and of a distrust of a system and they have to rebuild a relationship, and that's not a quick fix. You know, we all have history of relationships of and time and trust that we could build off of, and most of our folks start from ground zero, where they really have to take step by step of just, number one, trusting an adult or another human in their life that won't fail them, trusting that someone will walk them through a housing system or a judicial system or any of the other, and not give up on them when it gets really hard. So those are just some things that we really deal with on an everyday relational basis, just to be able to get to somebody to have that recovery conversation.
Thanks so much, Fawn. And this is a panel on affordable housing, and we started off by talking about some demographics and some trends in folks experiencing homelessness. So I just want to invite the panel a little bit to talk about what that spectrum looks like, because there isn't a solution for people experiencing homelessness that isn't also connected to behavioral health availability in the city, that isn't attached to affordable housing opportunities, which might require more building and those sorts of things. So I wonder.
I could just, I could add one quick comment. 1,000 men, over 1,000 men, 300 or 400 women, and way too many kids. The resource that our community receives that enables us to produce an affordable housing community that would serve those folks from a capital perspective, a production perspective, is essentially enough for 50 to 75 units a year. Correct, Rob? One community, approximately 50 to 75 units, is the amount of resource our community receives in each calendar year. So it's going to take a while at that pace.
Does anybody else want to speak to sort of the spectrum of where those gaps are and how we can intervene, or how different organizations are working to intervene?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we're going to have is a lot more public-private partnerships. So you're going to need businesses to step up to fill in the gaps. So when you do a gap analysis on the city and the shortages of where your systems approaches are at, you think of the spaces between your fingers, and you put your other fingers together like this to see where the gaps can be filled. And you cannot rely just on state, county, city, or federal dollars. It's impossible. They can only fill in some of the needs. You have to have philanthropy, you have to have capitalism, you have to have for-profit, non-profit agencies that are all willing to step up. Part of the issue, which has always been a hot button, is the Growth Management Act. It's a policy issue that you have to address legislatively in the state of Washington over at the Capitol. And that's something that Spencer's aware of, and other folks that know the issues we have to tackle. So it's so complex that it's not just where I would say, oh, it's a simple approach. It's not simple. And you have to deal with all of the needs that are affecting each part of that person, and your personal needs might be different than mine. So if you know somebody who is struggling with mental health and drug addiction and they're homeless, how do you treat that person as a whole, respectively and humanely, in a way to get them off the streets to be successful? You cannot put them just into housing and think it's going to work and hold them accountable. That's why it's important that they have wraparound services. That's why there is an emphasis on taking care of the individual person as a whole and not leaving that gap there. Because as Rob knows, Rob's an expert. The man deserves credit. You have to deal with the individual, and there's 3 different types. There's have-nots, will-nots, and can-nots. You're going to have the shelter-resistant, then you're going to have the 2 other populations that want the help, don't know how to ask for the help, and need the help because they've lost their job, they're been away from one paycheck away, or they've already been kicked out and they're living in their car. So how do you address with those people and their needs to get them in the situation? It's not as easy as one thing, but it is workable if we put all the people together to address it. It's going to take a lot of dollars. It's going to take a lot of adults in the room to sit there and fix an issue and think outside the box and be really, really creative, flexible, and nimble with how you spend and use tax credits. Darren is the expert on tax credits. So there's ways you're going to have to do things to think outside the box.
I'm gonna ask Darren to speak and then Spencer, you afterwards. But Darren, if you could talk a little bit about from the perspective of someone who builds affordable housing, what are the obstacles that you're faced with? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the opportunities specifically in the Spokane area for this audience, which could also include some challenges that you're experiencing? And then Spencer, maybe after Darren, you can talk a little bit about the policy and things like the Growth Management Act and things like that, and the way that contributes.
It's a good question. Obstacles. There are always obstacles, no matter what you do. And I think from the perspective of affordable housing production, the biggest obstacle is really resources. We need more federal resource in order to really tackle the problem. Part and parcel with that, though, is we need more competition. We need more folks in the mix using the scarce resources, driving us collectively to better outcomes. And no matter what you do and what space you end up living in, and the broader community that you're participating in from an employment perspective, there are lots of folks that want to restrict participants and restrict competition in order to preserve and protect their comfortable status quo. And we need more disruption. We need a lot more disruption in the affordable housing space, which is really a competition and a consequence issue, which is policy and leadership. I would say that that's probably the biggest obstacle right now. Is there a second part?
There we go. I really liked earlier that you talked about capital A affordable housing and lowercase a affordable housing. I think it's really important to distinguish between the two. The capital A affordable housing involves low-income housing tax credits, other programs that are available to fund housing that is designed specifically to meet certain requirements for affordability. That's a really important part of the housing market that captures the bottom rung of the ladder. But there's also a bigger conversation about housing affordability, lowercase a, because there are a lot of people in Spokane, and not just in Spokane, but in lots of markets, where housing is increasingly out of reach. So I explained the housing affordability problem, lowercase a, as a Jacob's ladder. You've seen those toys, you flip it and then it kind of goes all the way down to the bottom. So as you lose or fail to produce housing at the high end of the market, that has reverberations that then go all the way through the rest of the market. So when you're not providing enough housing at the top, the people who are looking there, and we don't yet live in a country, and hopefully never do, where we're allowed to just tell people you are not allowed to come. You know, we're going to wall our city off, and you're not allowed. So as long as people want to come here, if we're not providing that housing at the high end, they're going to come looking at the next rung down and kicking off the people from that rung down to the next one. And it just follows all the way down through the housing market until that last rung just falls off. And so the capital A affordable housing can help us with that last rung. But as you noted, the scale of that problem is massive. And I don't know how we solve that problem with, I mean, there's no way I can imagine that we would put the kind of money we need to completely solve that under the current conditions. So solving that Jacob's ladder problem is another important piece of that. And I think that gets lost when we talk about housing affordability, because we look at the high-end housing and we immediately think, soak the rich. Why are developers only building high-end housing? There's not it. The economics of building housing is tricky, and just the capital costs involved. I mean, just the sheer lumber and materials that go into a house is really expensive, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that. So that's not to say that we should only ever go out and build high-end housing for the highest income households. But when we're not looking at this picture holistically, we're just never going to meet the scale of that problem. So.
Speak to what you mentioned earlier, the zoning code changes.
The ones that we're working on now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so some things that the city is working on currently. How far do you want me to go? You want me to go back to the Romans? I'll try to make it quick. The way that we deliver housing now, the entire housing market is very, very different from what mine and your great-great-grandparents would recognize. We've had a major cultural shift, and it was led by a lot of changes in regulations and government programs, but also just individuals sort of seeking the better life. We think of the American dream as like the house in the suburbs with the fence and 2.1 kids and a dog. That vision really took shape in the wake of World War II. We've gone through the Great Depression, we've gone through the World War. We were suddenly the industrial powerhouse, the only one left standing in the world. Our economy was amazing. We had built up all this industrial capacity and we needed to put it somewhere. We were no longer putting it into tanks. And so we essentially decided that housing was a good use for that capacity. A sort of a simplified version of the story. But as a result of that shift, we've created now cultural expectations around housing that include the concept that a neighborhood that is that we designate as exclusively for single-family homes is a sacrosanct, piece of ground that shall not be violated by the idea that a person who rents their house should live there. Right? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that is sort of the cultural norm that we've created that never existed in the history of humankind until this period about 100 years ago. We're not going to go back to the way that we did housing all the way back then, but there were some elements of that sort of what I call the traditional way of building cities that created stability in a way that I think we've lost. And so to the extent we're making policy decisions, it's important for us to keep that in mind and try to build some of those concepts back in. So one of those, you're talking about triplexes and duplexes. It was very common in my great-grandparents' day for somebody to build a house as a duplex as a way to finance their mortgage. They would rent out the other half, and then that income would help them to afford the house that they were building. It was also very common for a shop owner to own the building, to build the building with the shop on the ground floor and live above that shop. Those are two things that we've basically written out of 90% of our city or more through zoning codes. So again, to the extent we can build some of that thinking back in, and so now to bring it back to some things that we're working on right now. One of the initiatives that we're working on that we hope in the next couple of months will actually be in front of City Council relates to accessory dwelling units. That's a very technical term. We call them granny flats or cottage houses, or there's lots of names for them. Basically, you have your single family home and then you build a small house in the backyard. We're looking at some updates to those regulations that will make them easier to build. We know that there are a lot of obstacles there. And so one of the efforts that we're working through is to try to make those easier to build as a housing type. We're looking at changes to the way that we regulate lot sizes, the arrangement of lots. We're looking at the platting process. Basically, any point in the process that a developer has to touch, we want to create opportunities where they didn't exist, and we want to make it just easier to build that housing. Because again, the system was really built with sort of a different era in mind, 1950s, 1960s. We can grow into the sunset forever. We learned over time that created traffic impacts and environmental degradation. There's a lot of reasons that we sort of put the brakes on that. And this gets to the Growth Management Act. That's where the Growth Management Act comes from. We recognize that unbridled growth without any kind of plan in place for how it should happen wreaks havoc on our communities in a different way. What we need to find again is that how to recapture some of that flexibility in the housing market, to create choice, to create opportunities for people at all ends of the spectrum. So,
Can I just add on the Jacob's ladder comment? I think one way that you can think about how the Jacob ladder shows up at the lowest level when you don't invest in all of these other levels is folks like Rob and I that are running nonprofits have people who are ready to graduate out of subsidized housing, but literally have nowhere to go because the college students are living in the lowest of the lowest apartments now just to be able to survive and go to school, right? Or the family that's barely surviving paycheck to paycheck has 12 people in a 1-bedroom apartment just making ends meet. So until we really address that as a full spectrum, and as our vacancy rates have been below 1% for 5 years, we have to address every level. It's not a low income housing issue that we have in Spokane. It's a housing issue we have in Spokane.
Thanks so much for that. Chris, I was wondering if you would want to offer some of the specifics that Hello for Good is doing and some of the work that you've done to at least the groundwork to start identifying some gaps and how you imagine some of these public-private partnerships.
So as I said, we started September 1st. Part of the issue that I saw right away is how do you teach information? So it's education. How do you educate the public? How do you educate our steering committee? And Fawn's on our steering committee, so she knows exactly what's taking place. How do you put all the facts that are affecting everything in our community in front of a group of people to educate them on trafficking, drug addiction, mental health, vocational programs? You know, how do you build leadership, mentorship, the family unit, the failing of the family unit? How do you look at supporting all those aspects of a community to make sure there's equal opportunity for families? Why would you have to be spending $3,600 a month for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment with no bells and whistles, flat paint, no granite counters? You just think everything some of us have grown up on or some haven't grown up on. $3,600 a month for 2 bedrooms, 2 bath is a lot of. So I think it's to the point where education is the first step. Second is, how do we inform people? How do we get, social media is fantastic, and that's also an enemy. Because how do you get it out there with accurate, factual data that the media is not going to twist? And media can be your friend, and media can also be your enemy unless you're using it correctly. So by telling things factual, showing the real data, by bringing all aspects of a community to the table from every walk of life possible, is the structure we're trying. So we're bringing every group of whether the activists, the advocates, the for-profits, the nonprofits, the businesses, the stakeholders, the education systems, the mental health systems, the hospitals, everything you can think of has to have a place at the table to improve a city. If you put all those people that are considered the thought leaders, which would be you as well, how do you put your place at the table? Where is your future going to be viewed at? What do you look at for your future? And how do we make sure and incorporate that to support the city, to make sure it's a vibrant, safe, economic city to continue to grow and attract all of those things we talked about earlier? And that is going to be part of policy. Part of it's going to be shifting to different areas that I think we're morphing and growing in different areas to I didn't expect. But it's also going to be a community impact where how do you put people in the same room who do not have the same political beliefs? That's also going to be some of the things we have to check to make sure people leave those politics out of it. It has to be key to make a successful organization. And there is no way around it unless you're very intelligent with thoughtful people who you bring in that are smarter than me. So I want to bring in the smartest people possible who can tell me where we can be going, what could we be doing different. Part of that is we educate our people with speakers every week. It's been kind of a blur. But because we've had so many presenters from across the country speaking on every possible topic you can think about that would affect your family, whether it's opportunity zones, investment structures, tax codes, tax credits, social welfare, education. I mean, the topics are going to continue to grow, whether it's fentanyl, a lot of the issues that are affecting our community, it's touching everything. So housing is connected to every single aspect of our community. There's not one piece, there's not one federal agency that homelessness does not touch. So you think about silos. How do you bring those people out from being siloed? How do you get them out to support the community to where it benefits every aspect? That's our approach. That's what we're trying to shift the gears on, to do something outside the box. We are intentionally trying to make people uncomfortable by getting used to being uncomfortable, because it's the only way you're going to be able to grow as a person, as a professional, to look at when you're driving down the road and you see all the homeless folks. They're people. How do we treat them with dignity and respect and class, by also giving them connection to services? So that's another approach. It's not an easy one. As Fawn said, when you have 1,000 men and then families, and with Rob, with the families at Daisy Catholic Charities, there is dignity in treating people with class. I do not have to, you can walk down the street. How do we treat the individual off the street that we don't even know? How do you walk up to them, shake their hand and say hello? So hello for good. Hello means helping empower lifelong opportunities. We wanted something that was going to be impactful, meaningful, and would help the community understand that this is about a team approach, not one individual. This isn't about taking credit. This is about making sure everybody comes to the team to do what's necessary. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. I hope I can explain more, but that's a much longer conversation. And I would definitely get the weeds of policy, which I don't want to do. So anyway.
That's great. Thank you so much. Darren, I was wondering if you, so we're gonna get in the weeds a little bit, I think. If you could sort of, as painlessly as possible, which is gonna be painful, maybe talk a little bit about what's involved in anybody building affordable housing, especially at the scale you do, but a for-profit business. How long does that take? What are some of the steps that you have to take? What different agencies do you have to work with to be able to do that? So that's going to be the sort of dry part, but I think helpful for people to understand why this is going to take a while to resolve. And then I'd also love to hear something about one of your favorite projects that you were able to work on. So maybe that could be the bonus at the beginning or end.
My favorite project, far and away, is Gonzaga Haven.
Yeah, there you go. Right answer.
And Thane and Gonzaga are a big part of that. Just the name, right? Just the name. That was Rob's idea. I want to call it Gonzaga Haven. And I thought, good luck. Thane will never say yes. So we'll go think about it for a while and then say no. And he immediately said yes. So that's my favorite. It's easily my favorite, most favorite project, because of the partnership with Gonzaga University, Center for Community Engagement, I believe, is the department on campus that facilitates, how many human volunteer hours a year? Thousands.
Yeah.
10,000, 20,000, some crazy number. So it'll be great to see that partnership play out over the coming years. And as Chris mentioned, this is a complicated issue, and some at times can be overwhelming, but it also can be simple. And just being a student and participating through the Center for Community Engagement and teaching a kid to read at Gonzaga Haven is being part of the solution. How to develop affordable housing.
Like in 2 minutes.
It's no different than producing non-affordable or market rate housing. The difference is how it's financed. The key must-have finance component is an allocation of federal tax credits. Federal tax credits are worth approximately there's two different types of credits. One credit is worth approximately half of the overall capital cost of an apartment community. The other credit is 90%, produces capital sufficient to cover 90% of the costs. So you can imagine if you strip out half of your available capital to produce a community, and you have to go solve in other ways for that how that's super challenging. And that becomes incredibly complicated and cobbling together all kinds of different capital sources. We don't do that because there's not enough time in life, in my opinion, to do that. The communities that we produce, the affordable, big A affordable communities that we produce are capitalized with tax credit equity, which we effectively sell. A large financial institution, our primary partners are Wells Fargo and Bank of America, enter into a partnership with us through which they receive tax credits over a 10-year period of time. Those credits are a function of the cost of the community that we produce up to a limit, and are created once we move a human into a completed apartment community, and we don't charge more than a set amount of rent, and they don't make more than a set amount of income. That creates the credit. We use the equity from Wells or B of A to finance half of the community approximately, and then we borrow the conventional mortgage. It's not quite that simple, but it's effectively a must-pay conventional mortgage that covers the other half. And it's not terribly hard if you can get the credit. How hard is it to get the credit?
Really hard.
Well, right now in our state,
Really
our state has decided, the credit, it's a federal credit, it's federal tax credit that gets allocated to the states, and then the states have the flexibility to allocate out to users or developers, and they get to add on all kinds of rules. They have unique interests or unique desired problems they're trying to solve, and so they allocate the resource in an effort to solve those problems. Our state has recently concluded that it's more appropriate to allocate all the resource to nonprofits, and it's causing folks like us, who've been one of the largest producers of affordable housing in our state for probably the last 10 years. We're moving to our human resource is being pointed at Idaho and Nevada and other states, because the rules of the game have changed here, and it just isn't, it's not worth participating. So that it can be incredibly challenging. And even if you can get the allocation, the economics have to work. And the economics have to work. So, and that's a function of where is that rent ceiling and how much does it cost? So it can be more complicated.
Just a quick add to that is that the problem with Washington allocating the tax credits to nonprofits to build is we aren't good at that. We don't know how to do it. The reason why BOA and Catholic Charity have low-income housing projects is because this gentleman knows how to do it, and he does it very well and effectively and at a cost savings. So when we do it, we do a very poor job. So it's a bad plan for Washington.
And I would just say that the people in our organization are good at producing housing, but we're good because we've had to compete for years and years and years. And what we need, what every community, what every state needs, is as much competition as it can get, and for consequences to follow. Good consequences, way to go, you get more, and bad consequences. You didn't do so hot, so you get to go stand on the sidelines. And unfortunately, in this space, mission gets in the way, and the allocators think, well, you're doing God's work, you're doing great work, you must be good, hopefully here's more. And oh, you now have a big problem, so we'll just throw even more money at you to solve that problem you got. And then all the resources are gone. Imagine that.
So speaking of obstacles, obviously one of the things that we've surfaced, and we've already been at this for almost an hour, so we're about to turn it over to Q&A. But before that, just thinking about, as Chris mentioned, sort of the importance of the right information and the true information, and being able to share that in a way that people understand, and thinking about some of these obstacles that if public eye isn't on them, they become worse, like these policies that you're talking about. So I'm curious, for any or all of you, I'd love to hear your answer. How do we bring the community along? How do we win hearts and minds, and how do we avoid things like some of the other challenges once you get everything to go ahead, and then the NIMBYism steps in or something else? So any of those sorts of solutions or ideas that you would like to share, any of you? Spencer has the microphone, so I don't know if that means you want to start.
You're teed up, buddy.
I guess that's not cute. I think it's important to recognize that what we call NIMBYism, which does cause problems in our housing market, comes from very understandable reactions to, I think, people's concerns about their neighborhood and about the kind of development that they've seen in the past. And this gets back to my long side story about the history of development in the United States. But in the early days of sort of mass suburbanization and everything, it came with a lot of problems. And growth still does come with problems. There's more traffic now here than there used to be. There's more parking problems. Those are all impacts that are real. So I think first it's important to acknowledge that a lot of that sentiment comes from a real, genuine concern. Now, just because it's a genuine concern does not mean that it forms the basis of good policy. So I'm not suggesting that we should make all of our housing policy based on providing parking for everybody that wants it, or building housing where we're going to end up with traffic problems in downtown Spokane. That's not what I mean. But let's make sure that we recognize that. I think the way to overcome some of that is through making small incremental changes. When we come in, and we as the royal we, whatever, with revolutionary ideas to dramatically change the way that business happens, it's understandable that people get really worried about that. Now, there will always be a fight to be had about every little change. This is something I'm learning in my time in government. You will always find somebody who does not like the idea that their neighbor could have 5 chickens instead of 4 in their backyard, right? So again, I'm not saying we avoid conflict, but finding the smallest thing to do and then doing it as quickly as we can. That's one of the challenges that I'm finding in my time in government, and this is my first government job, so cut me some slack here, I guess. But the process is really important and sometimes unnecessary, at least in the length of time and effort that goes into even just the smallest little things. So finding ways to have those rapid changes, but small changes, I think is helpful in getting people on board. Also finding opportunities. Let me give you an example from the city of Tacoma. One of the programs that they implemented back in 2015, they called it their residential infill pilot program. It was a pilot program. By design, they limited the number of projects that could happen, but they focused on allowing a variety of housing types in, at the time, what they were had as single family neighborhoods. They opened the whole, I think it was the whole city up to these projects, but they limited the number. The goal there was twofold. First, the pitchforks and torches go away because we're only talking about, 5 to 10 projects citywide. The second is that it allowed the city to understand in real time the challenges the developers were having with the housing that they were trying to build, and also understand the concerns that the neighbors had, not perceived concerns based on, this false idea that if we upzone to duplexes, every house on my street is magically going to turn into a duplex. But in terms of actual real lived experience, as these projects went in, the neighborhood had real feedback to give on maybe concerns about the design of the housing that could be addressed in the design standards, or impacts in terms of parking. So it was a lower cost to entry way to start having those conversations. And now Tacoma's looking at more dramatic upzoning, but doing so in the context of these pilots that really helped them to gather the information and the community feedback that they needed to feel like they were addressing some of those concerns.
I would say we often have folks who come and want to talk about like homelessness, and it's complicated, right? It's very hard to unpack. It's hard to understand. The best way that we have been successful at that is just inviting people in to have an honest conversation, to see the work, to see the success of somebody when they receive the services they need, they get the front door key, they achieve their goals and move out, right? Just to have that honest conversation and the reality of that. I think we're going to have a lot of honest conversations. We're going to have, we do a walking tour, a downtown homeless woman's walking tour. If you were homeless in that Spokane, and you were, this is the walk you would do to go from shelter to housing, and people get to ask the real questions of what does it really mean? And oftentimes perspective has changed, and they come to the light of, oh, I could step in this way, or oh, if I could connect my business in this way. It just changes. I think we all have to invest as a community to educate ourselves on the things we don't know. And until we do that, we're gonna create perceptions that then become reality. And then change gets really stuck, and we're going to see this get worse, which I hope that we don't do.
I would just say we need many more high functioning young people entering the space who are legitimately young men and women for others. If we can accomplish that, we'll be well on our way, I think, to solving things in the coming years, hopefully.
You want to add anything, Chris? Or?
Yeah, I could do that. I think that the creativity of mixed housing, like Spencer was saying, the traditional way of how things were is blown out the door. Now it's a new way of thinking. So if you travel the country, wherever you might go, Kendall Yards is a good example of what new housing looks like, where you have mixed use. You know, the malls. So you look about the malls across America, for all of those vacant buildings. It's a sign of the times. Things have changed. People shop different. Their habits are different. They think creatively different. Sometimes they don't want as much anymore. So you have all those square footage and acreage of all those areas. So now it's being created to look at how do you rezone, and that's part of the other issue is how do you look outside the box, but the retail stores below and the housing on top. So it turns into a feeder. So you actually start doing economic impacts where you actually have employment. You have jobs in the same areas where you work. You have less commute time. You have different transit. You have different things. And part of the things that I've seen when I lived in Oakland during the last job I did for the regional administrator is I saw, and I drove probably 6 times my entire time in 3 years. I took public transportation every day. So you look at what is happening where you have the jobs. You have all of it's a feeder. So if you can create that in a city like Spokane, which we have, when you see more of it, is how do you put those areas in it's strategically placed. You don't want to do density. You want to be careful on how you do it. You want to look out and think outside the box because you bring in fresh talent, bring in the future engineers, you bring those kind of people where you're thinking, how do we do something different that hasn't been done? And sometimes I can say that Spokane gets in Spokane's way. So we need fresh perspective. We need good ideas. We shouldn't be afraid of challenging the status quo because there's nothing wrong with thinking outside the box. Because thinking outside the box gives you an opportunity to do something that hasn't been done, or you've been told, oh, you can't do that, it's not gonna work. So I actually like being told that because I can go and show you, yeah, it can be done. But you put the right people in the room and you know, it's some of the tax credit issues, like Darren was saying, is it's competition. Competition is fantastic. You produce a better outcome and you get a better results. And most times you're going to show it's under budget. And you can show the metrics on a much better standard rather than something different. So it's good to think outside the box.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, my name is Scott Nickel. Spokane's my hometown. I grew up here. I just want to thank the speakers here. I've loved to see the growth of my hometown. It's great. And the challenges that we're facing are opportunities. And I personally believe that Spokane can and will be a model city in America. When it comes to housing affordability, the uppercase and the lowercase, I'd be interested to know from each of you, what are some immediate next steps that we could be taking to get us to where we need to be? And then the second question would be, do you see the need for a specific leader or an entity that is the leadership on all of this? Is it supposed to be the mayor? Is it supposed to be a private, like Hello for Good, for instance? Do you see the need for a specific leader? And if so, who should that
I would say that having a leader would be good. And well, having a good leader would be good. And so just anointing someone or some jurisdiction the leader who isn't necessarily good would be a bad thing. And whether the leader is a governmental entity or something like Hello for Good, I think having leadership would be great.
And if you wouldn't mind expanding on, what do you think in your area of expertise are some immediate next steps Spokane can take?
That's hard, and I don't know that I have a good answer for it. I think from a state perspective, and really the issue, which essentially every state has, is it's a state issue because of the resources. The federal resources go to the state creates its own statewide resources. You can't really make much of an impact if you're just using local resources. I mean, even like the city of Seattle, which has a housing levy that's tens of millions. I think maybe they allocate around 50 million a year. It just is nowhere near enough to accomplish anything without the state and the federal resource. So from that perspective, honestly, I think this community has done a great job, which is really coalesced behind Catholic Charities and Rob and BOA and FON, and helping to use the scarce resource that we do have access to maximize production. In fact, the state rules changed because we were so effective. Imagine that. In order so that we didn't get as much, and it would be sent to other places in the state to be used less efficiently. So I mean, really, we need more resource, and I think it's focusing on some of the zoning opportunities and things Spencer's mentioned. It's probably the greatest opportunity right now. We get scale.
I don't believe that, city leadership can solve it alone, because we have county allocations, we have mayor, we have council. What we need is an entity like a Hello for Good or a continuum of care or something that really does bring the business community resources together, the nonprofit together, and all of our governmental entities, and helps us leverage and innovate. Government is too slow moving. They can't innovate, they can't be creative. So it's just not the right place to lead that work. But they need to be a key partner in it. I think the one thing that we could do now is I absolutely agree with the zoning. We have to really address that and get some innovation and some freedom around how we build affordable housing quickly in this community. And pilots are always a great jump off point. And we have a once in a lifetime opportunity where we actually have money from the state level and fluxing more from the federal. And I worry that we are set up to not leverage it the right way. So we need to get our community quickly figuring out a plan so that we can lift it and leverage it and use what we have to build things fast, or we're going to give it all back and miss nothing.
I think you're right that there's no one leader that's going to get us out of this. That sort of goes back to my comment about the culture that we built up. You don't change a culture with one person leading the way. That's really driven by all of us. And let me give you an example of sort of a cultural element that leads to. I guess it's just a little piece of data from the housing market. As we've been talking about these, the zoning code changes that we're looking at, we've been also, we've done a lot of outreach with neighborhoods, the public at large. We've also done some outreach to developers to understand the barriers that they see. One of the developers I talked to pointed out that laminate countertops, which are sort of the low end countertops in the marketplace, have become a lot more expensive in recent years. And the reason is that the market is really demanding higher end countertops. Quartz is like the minimum now. And so the problem is we've lost the capacity to build those laminate countertops, which used to be a lot more expensive, and the prices now, they're not quite on par with quartz, but they're a lot more expensive than they used to be. I'm not making a judgment on quartz countertops. I love them. My point is that culturally, we've started to demand more expensive housing. Another example, fire suppression. In denser building types, basically 4 units or more, we are required to put in fire sprinklers. That is really expensive. We're talking 15,000, 20,000, even 30,000 units. It is crazy expensive. I'm not saying we should let everything burn in a fire, but when we have conversations as a community about housing affordability, we have to remember that there's another side of the equation, the cost part, that we all sort of have a hand in. I don't know how you fix that problem necessarily, but electing the right mayor or even the right governor is not necessarily going to lead you out of that problem. And we could pass, I mean, honestly, we could abolish zoning overnight and allow builders to build anything anywhere. And it actually wouldn't solve our problem because there's a lot more to it. Financing, and capital flows, just the supply chain issues and the cost of construction. Those are all factors that have nothing to do with anything that the city has any control over. So I hope I haven't scared you with the scale of this problem, but there's a lot there.
I would say that to have a person, or not a person, an entity, you want an NGO, you want a non-governmental agency that is leading the helm, that is not politically based. So that way it removes all political bias from the individual leadership, and it needs to be done from a regional approach. So that way you have all cities surrounding the bigger city, and Spokane is the second largest city in the state, and we're surrounded by smaller cities. So all of those cities would then participate in making sure that whatever is being done is done on a regional collaborative approach And then you put all these city administrators, you put all the city individuals who are responsible for planning, like Spencer, and you put them all in the same room, and you all come to the same agreement. Every city's gonna have their own uses and needs. But at the end of the day, you do contribute to the same mission, and how you improve the bigger picture, which I think is definitely possible.
If I could just jump in, sorry, Chris, but it's a people issue. It's not a structure. We're not gonna go figure things out by creating certain structure. It's a people issue. And whether that human or those humans are in the governor's office or the mayor's office or NGO leadership or business leader, we need more effective leadership, folks that are willing to really lean in for the right reasons and understand that it's going to be disruptive and who cares because it's for the right reasons. And we have a significant lack of that type of leadership, in my opinion, across the board.
Yeah, I think what Darren said is correct. I mean, so the reality of it is those now, how do you do it? We know how to do it. It's just by putting the right people together. It is a leadership issue. And I think the other piece, what was the second part of the question? My brain is.
What are some things we could do right now? Yeah, let me get started.
It piggybacks on what Darren said. So competition. People automatically in certain circles protect their book of business. So in order to make it more competitive, it shouldn't just be the west side. It shouldn't just be the east side. It should be based on your metrics of what you performed, as Darren said. When you become too good, they go to the other side. And maybe they want to give somebody else a chance. But if your metrics is outperforming an individual agency across the state, how do you argue with evidence and numbers? Because you can get the numbers, but the facts are the facts. If you're producing a good book of business and you're doing what is necessary, then you can't argue that. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. Appreciate all your information. Spencer, you mentioned financing for the first time, and I'm a realtor. I'm newer, so I'm learning a lot still. And I've lived a very simple at poverty and below poverty lifestyle for the last 12 years. I'm making money for the first time in my life. I'm a yogi, so I'm good with that. My poverty. And I raised my kids right, and they're awesome. So, but here I am making money, and I'm starting to dig in and understand financing. So this might be more of a really good question.
I'll let him answer.
And Darren as well. I just learned about DSCR. So I can't go, because I'm still in my first 2 years, I can't go and I had a career change, last the restaurant, blah, blah, blah. I can't, and yes, I was in poverty while I had a restaurant. Almost everybody, very bad, unless you have. I can't go and get a loan based on my income right now. Zero. Nobody will come, especially Washington. Okay. But I can go to hard money, and I know hard money lenders, these customers in my restaurant, and willing to give me money at a really high interest rate. I can get a DSCR loan, which is based on DSCR's debt coverage ratio loan. So if you have a house, for example, there's a house on Boone right now, I think it's still for sale. They bought it in 2019, they flipped it. It used to be a commercial space. They flipped it into what they were trying to create was a duplex with 4 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms on either side. They realized that they couldn't sell it as a duplex because of single family zoning. So they're selling it as a single family, but they're saying, hey, you can close it up. You could potentially turn that into a 10-door. You could have a residential house of some sort, people in recovery.
So you're trying to solve for a finance issue on that kind of
Yeah,
opportunity?
so talk to me
Well,
about.
that's maybe an opportunity for like
Because
the
there's a
housing
housing
authority or SNAP that has, well, and there the vouchers that maybe you could rely on for residents that would boost your income and therefore the amount you also,
I'm not talking about me.
I
I'm
know,
talking about loosening up, not loosening up. I'm talking about options in lending. So taking a DSCR model and using it for the residential.
if you were using it
There's a
for,
town room sitting there for
if
people, right?
you were going to use it and target affordable residents, there would potentially be finance options through a SNAP or through a Spokane Housing Authority, or you could go out the other way.
Big fun.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on what they do, but there are options. And the other approach could be to go out from the resident perspective, go to the housing authority and try and get vouchers or get existing residents of the community with vouchers that would boost your rental income that you can then take to Chris at Washington Trust and persuade them to rely on, right.
After a year.
So, maybe I'll try to comment on your issue without solving it, but I like to talk, so. This gets back to the systemic problem or the cultural problem we have. Our system of financing housing is exceedingly efficient at getting new homes built on the edge of town. In greenfields, bulldozing that area and just building up new homes. Financing is great at that. It's generally pretty good at building 20-story apartment buildings downtown. Because we lost that, I guess the muscles, the cultural muscles to build sort of the missing middle housing that we hear all along to talk about. There aren't a lot of options for what you're talking about. And that's, so sorry, I don't give you a solution there, but I'm really good at identifying problems. So.
I work as a small builder in Spokane and developer, and we do roughly 10 to 20 entry-level homes a year, and approximately 40 to 60 entry-level apartment units, and they're all infill. And we've looked into doing like capital A affordable housing with like home funds in Spokane City, and we found this economically it's difficult, especially with prices. And you guys mentioned competition, and we're low on the total pool when it comes to competing with larger firms and developers. And I guess my question was, do you, maybe Darren or Spencer, see in this area where someone lower on the total pool when it comes to size of developer, the capacity we can take on niches that we can fill to fix both maybe the lower A affordable housing or the try to get into the different sources of capital that can help with different more than capital.
Sounds like you're on your way. Those are impressive numbers, and you seem rather young, so nice job.
He's building.
The big A affordable, you really have to get to a larger scale to get the economics to make them work, and that's a 50, 60 unit, ideally more like 70 unit. On the one side of the tax credit program, the other side, you actually need to be well over 100 to get any level of efficiency to make it all work. But what you're doing in terms of the infill and the entry-level homes and whatever the number was, 40, 50, 60 unit apartment communities, smaller communities that add up to 60, that's meaningful.
Is there, maybe with Spencer, is there something program the city has like home funds? Is that going to be changing at all? Because we've looked into them and it seems it just doesn't work very well when it comes to construction.
So I don't manage the home funds program, so I can't really comment on that. I think maybe to the larger question here, the value of enabling small developers, smaller forms of development, is that first we're providing housing, which is really important right now, but we're also spreading that the wealth that comes from creating buildings that people live in more broadly. So somebody like you, and again, the system's not designed for that. So to the extent we can retool the system, that's great. But the benefit, if we can get to that point, is that we are empowering people who are working at a smaller scale than the system currently is built for, to build that wealth. Going back again to the way our great grandparents did things, that's how that American dream was built. It was actually built on models where I often say we need to expand our idea of what a developer is. This fits into the accessory dwelling unit conversation that is happening right now. A homeowner that builds an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard is a developer. We should recognize them and we should applaud them for building housing in the housing market. Somebody who builds a duplex or a fourplex is a developer. And that's a way to build wealth that we basically locked out for over a generation now. It's just not the type of housing that we built our economy to do. So again, sorry, I'm short on solutions.
Yeah, I,
Don't be the church.
yeah.
Keep going.
I would just add, I mean, I, you know, there's competition that's healthy, but also competition is good to talk to about some of these resources, especially with the turnover that's happened in the HHS department. And home funds have never been meant to fund a project. They're really meant to be the very last thing that gets added on at the end. So that's actually the area that I do my committee work. So I know a little bit about the funds.
And they usually cost more than you get, so.
Lots of strengths.
It costs us a lot of money.
Lots of things tied to them. So, but lots of people have found other ways to manage some of that. I was asked to ask one of the questions from Zoom, and I'll make this sort of a quick question. And I recognize we're short on time, and there are other questions, so maybe we'll close, and maybe the panelists will be willing to stick around for a couple minutes if you want to ask some individual questions. And I'm going to sort of focus on this first question here. Because one of the things that when we're talking about developing affordable housing is what do we mean by long-term sustainable affordable housing? Because a big piece of it is recognizing, of course, the utilities aspect of it. So how does that sort of building sustainably fit into how we think about building new housing and affordable housing?
I've talked a lot, so.
You do good.
One thing we're required whenever we do a tax credit project is we have to meet all kinds of energy sustainability and evergreen standards, which adds hundreds and thousands of dollars to our costs. So if Spencer here had a solution and our legislation had a way to mitigate some of that for affordable housing, I think developers would lean in at a much better rate. But again, this really is a policy issue that is required within affordability.
There are always trade-offs, and you just need to strike the right balance. And certainly, a certain level of green it makes economic sense, and we certainly realize that. But from a policy perspective, the state of Washington seems to try and they do set a new bar every year. It's like, well, we got to aim even higher this year, even higher, and sometimes the cost of aiming higher can be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars on larger projects, and the payback, the return is very, very challenging. And the result is we are able to produce less affordable housing.
I want to come back to your 10-room house example. One of the things that I think a shift in mindset would bring is recapturing the idea of flexibility in our buildings. A lot of the older neighborhoods, when you drive around, I live in a house that used to be a duplex. Sometime before I bought it, it was converted to a single family home, but you can still see the hallmarks. It has a separate entrance around the side and whatnot. We used to build our buildings in a way that was much more flexible, so they could change to the current needs. I'm just reading the text of the question, and it talks about, building mansions and are we saddling ourselves with giant houses that we won't be able to use in 100 years. So I think that's another part that the market hasn't solved very well as we've shifted our cultural mindset. So again, you come back to like the corner store with the apartment on top. It's a really flexible use. That bottom store, if the economics cause businesses to go away, could be converted to an apartment, or the upstairs apartment could be converted to an office if there was a need for office use. That doesn't work so well in a mid-mansion neighborhood. So it's another part of the culture that I think we want to try to capture again.
So we're at the end of the evening. I wanted to offer an opportunity if anyone had any last words that they wanted to say, not like final words, but any last words for this panel. I would want to welcome the opportunity, or any invitation you have for anybody here for ways that they can be involved or participate with the work that you do. That would be great. Fawn, do you want to share a little bit, like share the program about walking?
Sure, I just think that our community is a really compassionate, caring community. We show up for each other. We have a history of doing that. And I think we all have invested enough in it that we don't want to see that go away. Gonzaga has a history, and Gonzaga students have a history of being highly intelligent human beings that have resources and a heart that wants to change what is around them. And so I just challenge each of you to lean in, figure out what your talents, what your skills are, be part of the conversation, be part of the solution, and show up in ways and ask questions in ways that maybe you didn't previously. And I invite any of you to a walking tour anytime. We love to tour folks around and invite you to a conversation. And the real reason for that is because front door keys are essential. None of us have what we have or are where we are today because if we didn't have a front door key. That front door key means literally everything. So just we need to provide front door keys for everybody in our community and figure out how to do that. My soapbox.
I would, for the students, many of whom I think have left, I would say the space of affordable housing, whether you're a developer, builder, banker, run a nonprofit, there's incredible opportunity, and you really can do great work and earn a living. You don't have to. You can pay your student loans and have a family, and there's this incredible opportunity. And I hope that more young people enter the space. And then the Jesuit principle of being young men and women for others is huge. It's just huge. And if you really believe it, produces all kinds of win-win opportunities. So.
All right, well, okay. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for sticking around a few extra minutes, but we appreciate all of your expertise. So let's give them a hand.
Thank you to all speakers and our fantastic moderator, Adriane Leithauser, Professor Leithauser here. I know students have left, many of them, but we have colleagues here who can take message and send back to classes. So hopefully next time, Gonzaga can be more involved, and the Gonzaga Heaven will be the visiting spot for us next time. Okay, so that concludes our event tonight. Everybody have a good evening, and hopefully to see you next time.
How are you?
All the data you have. You're on the planet, right? Yes. Watch some of your videos. Doing great. Yeah. Just wanted to say, I don't